welcome to the Americas Society Council of the Americas 7th Annual Women's Hemispheric Network Conference in New York. I want to thank many people. First of all, I want to thank our lead sponsor, Medtronic. Thank you so much. I want to thank our Women's Hemispheric corporate sponsor, HSBC. I want to thank our table leaders, Brascam America, CFA Institute, Greenberg Church, Matos Filho. And I want to thank the whole team, Randy, Natalia, Cara, for all the work that they've done and everybody else in putting this together. It's been a labor of love since the very beginning. We launched this exactly 7 years ago, and the way I know that is that we launched it the day after our board meeting exactly 7 years ago with Michelle Bachelet and the then First Lady of Mexico, Margarita Zavala, one who was a presidential candidate and one that actually served 2 terms of presidency, Michelle, and is now today at the UN Human Rights Commission in Switzerland. So since it was launched 7 years ago, we've hosted 36 events in 10 cities throughout the hemisphere. We've had 3,400 physical participants, and we've had over 150,000 views on our website or our live stream and YouTube. And we also have had innumerable quotes in the press and press outlets, et cetera. So while sometimes it's hard to say exactly what's our impact, we think our impact is quite large. And we think our impact is quite large because at every single session, no matter where we go, we always have these roundtables, these table leaders. We give the space for women between the ages of 22 and 35, or even older or even younger, to sit with peers, to sit with people that have traveled a road of a career longer than they have, to ask critical questions, to build their networks, and feel that in many issues regarding the workplace, regarding work-life balance, regarding all of the different feelings that you feel when you leave your children, if you happen to have children at home and go into the workplace, that maybe they have a little bit more support than they had before they left. And we've heard amazing anecdotes and actual proof of women that have left this and in their own countries used the individuals, the people that they've met, the networks that they've met, and build out their own WhatsApp, build out their own networks, and build out their own meetings of women and men to actually take the challenge that we put before them with the Women's Hemispheric Network to the next level. And you know, one of the things I also want to stress as we sit here is this is not just a dialogue of women, this is a dialogue of men. Last week in Argentina, I participated in a series of TED Talks from women related to the, I guess it was the G20. There's a women's thread, not the W20, but within the thread. And in thinking about what I was going to say, I really thought about my 40-some-year career, and I realized I have never worked for a woman. And it is only men that have given me the opportunity. And that's changing because when I started out, without exactly acknowledging my age, there were no women, so it was really hard to work for a woman. But if you think about it, today it's not the same, and there are many women that work for women, and that's terrific. But it also says that this is not a one-sided dialogue. This is a dialogue between men, between women, in the workplace and at home, and in the social environment as well. And because that's how you create and cement change. And sometimes in today's world, we think, well, gee, the way we communicate, and we were just talking about it in my office, is through WhatsApp, through messaging, et cetera, well, the real way you communicate is through talking to people, and maybe one-on-one, and it's easier to, at work, to hide behind an email, but there's nothing as cool as being able to walk in to your boss's office and have a conversation about what's going on and what your next step is, or what yesterday's step was, et cetera. So we're very devoted to this, and we have big plans for 2019. We're going to obviously do our 6th annual event in Miami. Miami's one year behind us. Nancy Anderson, who runs our Miami operation, is here today with us. So we're going to do that, hopefully in conjunction or in partnership with the University of Miami, which would be terrific. We're going to do something in Bogota. We're going to do a big event in Mexico City, and we'll be back in New York next year. And somehow, in one of my weaker moments last week, I agreed to do something in Argentina in the first 4 months, probably, or 5 months before, on this side of the primary in Argentina in 2019. Today's event is on the record. It will be webcasted live. So we hope that you will join the conversation by using our hashtag #PoundWomenASCOA. And I would like to just bring one other thing to your attention, which is that we have an amazing exhibition in our gallery downstairs. For those of you that don't know, we do have a small cultural program here besides our multiple public policy programs. And one of the gems that we have is an art gallery. And our art program is as long, historically, as our public policy program. It was also founded at the very beginning of the organization. And so we do 2 to 3 exhibitions. They're generally written up in the New York Times. They're generally really recognized. We have one of the best Latin American art curators in the world who works with us. She's the director of our visual arts program in our gallery. And so we have an exhibition called Lydia Cabrera and Edouard Glissant, Trembling Thinking. It's also in conjunction with the University of Miami. And so we hope that you'll all go down and you'll see it. She was a remarkable woman, a remarkable artist who was Cuban and left Cuba right after after the revolution. And Edouard Glissant is a poet, and there are many different things from the period and influences, poetry, et cetera, and it's very well curated. We opened it 2 days ago, so I would invite you to go see it. So again, thank you all for coming. We really hope that you will enjoy today, but that you'll take away something with you, and we look forward to seeing you and your teams in many other cities. And with that, I would like to invite forward Duda Kertész, did I say that right? President of Health E at Johnson & Johnson. Thank you very much.
I thought I was hidden behind this. I'm not so tall, as you can see, probably. But it's great to be here with you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Duda Kertész. I never had to explain my name when I lived in Brazil, but I feel like I have since I moved to the US 2 years ago, because people usually ask me, why Maria Eduarda turned into a Duda? This is a very simple thing in Brazil. It's just a usual nickname, like Bill is the nickname of William and things like that. But it's not because I hesitate too much. I just wanted to say that for the Spanish-speaking people in the room, right? So nothing to do with that. I work for Johnson & Johnson for the last 20 years. I started as a baby Johnson, as you can see. Kidding. In Brazil, actually, most of the time. And 2 years ago, I relocated to the US. So now I lead what is called internally Healthy for our consumer business. It's really Listerine, Johnson's Baby, Band-Aid, Aveeno Baby, and other cool brands I hope you all have at your homes, and at least know these brands, okay? But I'll talk more about it as we move. But before, talking even about career and women's leadership, I think it all begins at home, right? I was raised in a family with a sister and 3 brothers that actually, I didn't feel any difference being raised a girl versus my brothers. I was made to believe that I could do whatever I wanted and the opportunities were the same, right? For me, for my brothers, for my sister. My dad and mom, I think, made me believe that with, dedication and hard work, you can get whatever you want. And I think at the end, self-confidence is the gift that we can give to our kids. And I do think I got that from my dad and mom. And we'll get back to that, why that is so important. So to talk a little bit about my career or my journey, I joined J&J a long time ago. I actually was my second job. I worked first at Price Waterhouse still in like my second year in college. At that time, I didn't know if I wanted to work in finance or marketing. But I then left, joined J&J, still in my college. It's still at college. I was an intern. And I moved, multiple different marketing positions in Johnson & Johnson in Brazil until I got to be the marketing head of the company in 2003. I was then 29 years old. One of the board members, and the picture that you see up there is actually was the board at the time, the president of the company. I was the marketing director and the other directors. I had of age what my HR partner had of time in J&J. So not only I was the only woman, as you can see in the picture, but I was by far the youngest one. And I think those things actually, played the role together throughout my career. I cannot say I'm that young anymore, but, having multiple... Did I do something? I don't know if I did something. But I think, throughout my career, I actually got the opportunity to get to big positions pretty young, pretty early, and not necessarily being ready or completely ready for each one of them. So we'll talk more about that as well. Then I moved, I was promoted 4 years later to be the vice president for the baby and the beauty businesses in Brazil and in Latin America. 4 years later, I became the president of our consumer business in Brazil, which is a pretty sizable business. At the time, we were the second largest operation after the US. Of course, currency doesn't play in our countryside, so that got reduced in dollars. Now it's, I think, the third country. But I did that job for 5 years, which was pretty cool, I think. And the business at that point, grew by 80% from the period, I left, comparing to where I got the business. And multiple transformations and good things we did together with the team. And then 2 years ago, I got the opportunity to move to the US with my 2 kids. I have a boy, 16, and a girl, 14. Usually when people ask me what keeps me up at night, it's having teenagers at home. Business, I think we deal with that, but raising kids is by far our hardest job from everything we do, right? But I think, from in my experience, as I mentioned, I think most of the times I was not fully prepared to get to these big positions. I was not completely ready when I got to be the marketing head in Brazil. I was not completely ready to be the Latin America leader for baby and beauty. I was completely not ready to be the president of the business in Brazil when I got the job. And I think a couple of things that helped me I think, succeed in these jobs that I will share with you today. I think one is just not being afraid of learning from others, right? Recognizing that you don't know everything, I think, is the first step to actually be open to learn. If you get to a new job and you feel like you have to prove that you are the best and that you deserve the job and that you have to, perform, and of course you do have to perform and you do have to show you deserve the job, but it's not by knowing more than anyone else. It's actually having the humility to learn what you don't know and to learn from people that are there for longer than you. And I think that helped me a lot. Not only, I learned from people on my team, but I'll give you 2 examples of, I think, super helpful things for me in 2 different occasions. When I got to be appointed to be the president in the J&J consumer business in Brazil, I was lucky enough to have, good friends that knew very different profile of presidents or CEOs in different companies in Brazil. And before I actually, started the new job, they brought me to talk and to have lunch and just got introduced to different CEOs. And then, and actually, those were consulting people, of course, right? Because they clustered the profiles. So they like, okay, you talk to this person, very charismatic, people-oriented. This other president, super rational, data and analytics-oriented. And then the other one was specialized in turnarounds. And so by talking to much more experienced people than me, I actually, learned a lot and got a lot of very useful tips that helped me throughout my journey. When I got here in the US, these good friends of mine actually did the same. And they said, I will put you in contact with Brazilian executives that had to come and lead US companies. And then you can also talk about and kind of learn what they have faced and be more prepared to what you will face. And I think, like those small things actually, just being open to learn from multiple different sources, I think, just makes us more prepared to face whatever comes our way. I also, I think I was never afraid of counting on people. And this means, yes, the team and, engaging them and bringing them on your side. But also counting on people to help you and support you at home, friends, having a network of support, I think, inside the company, outside the company. I think that's super important for us as women, to have a life, have a family, have work, and continue to progress. So I think that's super important too. And the last one, take risks. I don't think we get, my belief, personal belief, I don't think we get much further if we don't take risks, right? Risks of raising the hand and say, I want the job, even when you are not totally ready. Risks on the business and making bold decisions to grow or to, make the hard decisions that you have to make. But I think if you play conservative or you're too afraid of failure, actually, it's just hard to advance. So going back to my family, and I mentioned, how, and you can see the power pose, right? Like right in the back. I think I was lucky enough to be raised in this family. I also was very lucky, I'm still very lucky, to work in a company that, from the start actually has a very good gender balance. From the 13 first employees at J&J, 8 were women, and we do have big representation and a credo that actually, brings a culture that I think celebrates diversity and makes us all feel comfortable there. All of that actually made me feel a lot empowered, right? So I didn't see or realize a lot of obstacles or hurdles by being a woman. I remember One of the first interviews I gave when I became the president of the company in Brazil, a reporter asked me, like, how do you feel being a female president and leader? I'm like, oh my God, I actually never thought of myself as a female leader. I only thought of myself as a leader because I am a female. Like, what other thing could I do, or be? It's like I really didn't realize, and I didn't feel anything, like any prejudice or obstacle. I'm sure they were there, but I kind of ignore. And maybe that was the self-confidence that sometimes it could be too much. But I think a lot of things had to happen so that I could realize and just look around and see, that maybe it was easy for me, and I didn't notice too much of the hurdles or the obstacles, but they were there, right? It took me having a daughter of my own and then thinking about how it will be for her growing up, right? It took reading, because I then started to read a lot. And there's a lot of great things about gender equality and diversity in general, right? But I think that is astonishing statistics. It's in Portuguese, but it will take 200 years, not only in Brazil, but I think almost everywhere in the world, for men and women to reach equality in salaries, in jobs, in political positions, in government, just in society in general. And I think that's way too long for us to wait. I also, during my journey, as much as the obstacles for me were kind of invisible, and it didn't stop me. I did see a lot of great women giving up their careers, thinking that they couldn't make it, or how can I balance family and a career? How can I do it? It's too much. And it could be too much. And for some of them were. And, also by being part of multiple organizations in Brazil, like Mulheres do Brasil, or Women of Brazil, I don't know how to translate that in a good way, or the Women 360 organization in Brazil, and so many others. I just saw that actually there are sectors that are so much harder for a woman than I think a consumer packaged goods company or J&J, right? So I have very good friends that work in banks, in airlines, in construction, and so many other sectors that is just tougher, right? The road is still long ahead. So the obstacles are there. I think the hurdles are there, whether we see or we don't, but they are there. And things like the double shift syndrome, I think, and we're talking more, Latin American countries, I think that's even worse, at least in my experience, where a woman is expected to still have most of the house chores, right, or the responsibilities for a family and for the kids, when you have kids. So it's still very imbalanced how we divide the responsibilities at home. So a woman that works actually has to get home and take care of everything else. So, I think one key thing to change that is having the partners participating more at home. Not only the woman wanting to work more, but for that to happen successfully, we do need help, and men to step up as well, or partners in general. There are a lot of family and cultural pressures. I think that happens everywhere in the world, but I think in Latin countries as well. I don't know how many of you have kids or, have heard this before, but I certainly have. When I worked, and we are fortunate enough in Brazil, and I think in other Latin countries, to have help at home, right? To have nanny and sometimes a driver and a cook, which is, believe me, if you move to the US, it's a very different reality. And we are fortunate, right? I mean, that makes our lives easier and feasible in many cases. But how many of you have heard, oh, aren't you afraid that your daughter will call nanny mom at some point? I was never afraid. I knew I was the mom. And, I wished my kids actually loved the nanny because that means she's good for them. So, but a lot of people are afraid of these things because those invisible voices, or not so invisible, they keep coming and saying, oh, who are taking care of your kids? You're traveling this week again? Like those, yeah, I am. And by the way, they have a dad too, right? And it's not doing any favor. Because, right, or when you go to a school meeting and the mom, that sometimes doesn't work, going to, oh, that's good that you're here. You're not very present, right? And when a dad show up, so, oh my God, such a good dad, right? He's here. Seriously? Why is that? But, all these anecdotes are really true. And I'm sure, some of you have heard or done or pass through this, and that I think a lot of people actually are more influenced. I think we are all influenced by this. I heard that one is one of the best that I heard. Once I was invited to go to talk to a group of heart surgeons in the northeast of Brazil. Right, they were in a congress, a cardiovascular congress. And every time they have a separate meeting with the women surgeons. And there are so few of them, actually. And the statistics are astonishing, right? 50% of medical students out of college, out of the university, are actually women. 3% are surgeons. Because they were sharing their story. I actually went there to talk to them, but the conversation was so rich that I was more interested in listening. And the stories they told, like people since the start at university, they were told like, oh, are you sure you want to be a surgeon? Don't you want to try a lighter specialty because, you'll never find a husband, or how can you have kids? The hours are crazy, and then once they insisted and they went through, an OR, an operating room, usually some other people, usually the men, I have to say, at least in their stories, made them go through the hardest tasks. It's like if they had a patient that was heavy and, bigger, they will make them hold or, do the physical work just to test their resistance. And all these voices, are you sure you want to have a family? You want to have a husband? You cannot be a surgeon. You cannot be a business leader if you are, because it's impossible to balance both. I think those things, make you question yourself and think about if you want to do it or not. And a lot of unconscious bias, right? I talked about the double shift and double standards. Is like the dad bringing the kid to school or going to the school meeting. But I think we all have unconscious bias. So women also have an unconscious bias. We all have it. But that also play against us in most of our careers, right? We always, and I'll tell you a story about unconscious bias too, and myself, right? So I went to this heart surgeon event, and actually, my father had 3, I guess, heart surgeries over time. And that got me thinking, right? All these great, amazing surgeons. And I was thinking about me taking my dad to the appointment of the heart surgeon and waiting outside, of the office and just thinking, what exactly do I expect when I think about a heart surgeon? And I had to admit to myself that, it was kind of an old man, right? That wasn't my unconscious bias. Not that I would refuse if it would be a woman, but it's just, I think, when I think about a heart surgeon, that's what is in my mind. And I think we all have unconscious bias, unless we think about it and, challenge our own beliefs and think about, oh my God, those women are awesome, and I actually would love for one of them to operate on my dad. We don't realize that, right? Okay, we also have more Johns, and I cannot read the other name. I think David or whatever, William or, oh, David, yeah. John and David as CEOs of companies than women, which is fascinating every time I see that. Which means we have to do something, right? So we cannot just wait 200 years for this to change. And I think we all have a role. I think this is where we all come to the play and, you know, have to take a more active position in changing this situation. And I think there are a couple of things that women have to do as well, you know, as we want to change and we want to break this ceiling at some point. Visible, invisible, there's a lot of discussion whether how the glass, if it is glass, if it is concrete ceiling, but we have to break it regardless. And I think we all have to kind of exercise this confidence, right? Even if sometimes we self-doubt ourselves, and I do self-doubt myself, always. It's not that easy, but I think we have to, you know, face the challenges and really convince ourselves that we can do whatever we want. Seek help, I think I talked about that. I think, you know, we have to have a connection and a network of health. We have to get rid of guilt. That's a very woman thing to have. And we do feel, you know, every time that we have to make an option and, you know, travel and leave your kids, you know, miss a birthday or miss an important thing, every trade-off and choice we make in life, we kind of carry some kind of guilt. We want to be perfect on everything. It's impossible to be perfect, just accept it. But we want to be perfect wives, perfect, you know, daughters, perfect friends. And I don't think that helps us kind of balancing a bit of everything. So get rid of the guilt, take risks. I think I talked about that, but really raise your hand and look for the job. And, you know, we have to have a voice on changing the future. And I think it's not only the women that has to change the future, it's the men. It's impossible to do. We were talking about this in Susan's office earlier. But we do need everyone to want to change this, right? So it's the way we treat each other at work, it's the way we mentor each other, we support each other to grow and really create a future that is different for all of us. And I think one of the most important things that we can all do, men and women, is to raise our kids differently, right? In Latin America, you know, I think in the past we say, oh, treat girls with respect or treat girls nicely. Yeah, we want to be treated nicely too, but we want to be treated equally. And I think we all can do a better job in raising our kids to be equal at home and believe they can do whatever they want. If you don't have kids, you still can make a difference, so don't have to wait, right? I think we all have nieces and nephews and friends that have kids, so I think every situation that you see that is not treating girls and boys equally, I think we can have an impact. And be role models, right? Because I think there are several studies that show the importance of girls seeing, you know, since the very beginning, that there are people like them in all the professions and everywhere in society that they can look up for someone and think about, I can do that as well. So spread the word, not the world, the word. Oh my God, in Portuguese it's so much easier, but here we are speaking English. Spread the word. Thank you very much for having me or listening to me today. That's all. Thank you.